Hi, this is Jen Ailey, and today I'm here with Dawn Chitwood. Dawn is the CEO and marketing director of Upper Limits Digital, which is based in Asheville, North Carolina. She's been an entrepreneur for 15 years with a variety of businesses, including this marketing firm, and being involved in a couple of other ones as well before of her own, and as a partner. She does identity branding, social media for clients. She does content development and strategy. And she has been my marketing guru for as long as I've been in Asheville, so 5 or 6 years. And she's really helped me create my businesses and get a strong presence online. And it's been fun while it's been happening. So Dawn, welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm honored that you would have me as your first guest on your podcast.
Thank you. Awesome. So there's so many things here I want to talk about. And one of my favorite things about you is that how you just dive into things. And I would just love to hear experiences of taking risk and thinking outside the box and diving into things, and the pros and cons to that even. So if you think of one specific experience of that, and I've watched you do this a lot of times and it always seems to work out, knock on wood. So one thing I was talking to my clients about a lot is being able to think outside the box and do what you want to move toward, even if it's not what is what people expect. So I would love to hear a story about, if you have one of those that comes to mind.
God, well, that's my whole life, which is kind of funny because it's funny hearing somebody else in an outside perspective, somebody saying that, one of my favorite things about you, because of course, it's like one of the things that I often beat myself up over, right? Because I'm like, oh, there I go again, just jumping right in and not thinking about things, and then, and then kind of just floundering around, which is what it feels, which there are so many times where I've thought, man, wouldn't it have been nice if I would have just had the God-given gift of caution, and
Nope, you didn't get that one.
No, I missed the boat on that. I was obviously absent that day when they were giving out caution as personality traits, but and then I have to remember, as I've gotten older, like I think I've kind of come into it and embraced it a lot more. Of course, there were a lot of times growing up where that was, that's not necessarily like a trait that is, highly lauded as growing up, because as you're growing up and you're a kid, and of course, like parents, they want you to be careful and they want you to think things through and research things and make wise decisions. And school is very much that way. We want you need to be cautious and you need to think about things and think things through. And then you're pushed through college. And so for most of my life, I feel like that was something that was kind of looked at, frowned upon, say. So it hasn't really been until recently that I've really kind of started really loving that about myself. But I, like I said, I can think of just about every experience in my life has kind of been that way. And I would definitely say, if I look back to see my track record, I've made lots of mistakes, tons, but it always has worked out. And so that's just kind of been that voice, the voice now inside of my head now no longer says, Dawn, you got to think things through. Like, don't just jump in. Now the voice in my head is always saying to me, when I make decisions, say I'm going to go for something, I have that voice saying, look at your track record. It's always worked out. So I think that, I would say that would be, if I could just pick one thing, especially as it pertains to business and considering how we met, because we met about the same time. Yeah. I would say that moving to Asheville was that for me. We had kids, and we left the Outer Banks after 15 years. And we, with a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old, we just picked 7 places on the map, and Asheville won, and moved out here and had no jobs and no place to live and 2 young kids. And it was painful, but we made it. And I had a clean slate. And so I got to decide what I wanted to do. And it was a matter of survival. It wasn't, I hear a lot of stories about like, oh, I kind of want to leave my corporate job and go out on my own and have my own business, which I totally honor. I think that's awesome. But I was in a position where it was like, okay, I have no college degree and I really have no solid experience in any one thing other than starting businesses. So what am I going to do? And so it's kind of evolved. It didn't start out just as marketing. It started out more as, support, business support online. So more of like a VA, a vein in VA. And then I just really grew into the marketing piece, and that was what I loved. But that's one, I guess if I could pick out one experience, I would say that would be something I dove right into. And it's been great. I mean, we have 3 businesses now, and it's, we've been here 7 years and supporting my kids and, financial security as I know it. I know that probably infers like retirement and all this stuff, but in my opinion, I've reached a point where I don't have to worry about the bills getting paid, which is pretty damn awesome.
Yeah. And investing in real estate and, having goals that are beyond the survival mode and being able to think through the future and grow your businesses and take the risks and all of that. Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I traded stocks this morning. Like there was, 4 years ago, I couldn't afford, a stock in a company that was going bankrupt.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that says a lot about, the risk and diving in and doing what and then learning. Another thing I love about you is like you really just being willing to learn and dive into things and learn them and research them and go to conferences and keeping up to date with all the marketing stuff, which is a big project because it's always changing and evolving. And so and another question kind of like connected to that one is like, what is it like since, you didn't have a degree in marketing or, any of those things that you're actually doing? What are the pros and cons to being self-taught? And I guess in business and in your field.
Sure. So, I mean, I would say the biggest pro for me was being able to do this and be myself, because I didn't fit in that box necessarily of, I went to college. I went to several colleges, and, college for me was really more of an excuse to go someplace I wanted to go, like to go to some city I wanted to go. I went to college in Paris, and then, I was in Charleston. It was just kind of like what I did when I went to the place I really wanted to go. It wasn't as much about the education. So, I've always kind of been that out of the box person, and I didn't fit into that. That structure necessarily. And so I think one of the major pros is the fact that I'm able to be who I am and teach myself, because I do have a voracious appetite for learning. So that was never the issue. It was just the way I learn. So the fact that I've been able to learn on my own terms was the biggest pro for me. I don't have any student loans, so there's that. That's pretty awesome. Now the cons, and it's interesting because when the kids were babies and I was starting this business and I was learning, I was online taking certifications and flying to Boston and going to conferences and, taking out a line of credit so I could get a business coach in the beginning. There was a lot that I really risked, like you were saying, to go after this and to really have faith that I could make a go of this and make it happen. But it's interesting how over the years and doing all of this learning, staying up till 3:00 in the morning, getting certified and blogging, from big marketing companies like Digital Marketer and, HubSpot and all that stuff. I've read a lot, like some of the things that I've actually gone and take classes that I've taken classes in, and I'll go and I'll learn and I'll go, I have this like satisfaction because I'll say, oh man, I knew that, because I'd learned it through experience, but I was never certain because there is this feeling, at least that I have, this belief that if it's not taught to you in, let's say, a degree, that perhaps it's maybe not as credible. And so there's been a lot of validation. There's been a lot of validation along the way when I do actually go to those courses and certifications, and you learn things and you're like, yeah, awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
It's not, experience actually does count for something.
Way more even than just getting instruction too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's something that, that's a huge part of what I'm teaching a lot of times too, is like unlearning what you learned in school. And as an entrepreneur, we're all relearning and we're unlearning like the keep it in the box, do what you're supposed to, yada, yada. Because if you do that, you're just it's not going to work as a business, because you have to stand out. You have to do new things. You have to take risks,
Yeah. And you have to trust, right? You
Yeah.
have to trust that.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to really, intuition is such a huge thing. If I look back at things and say, well, it felt right and it was aligned with my beliefs about how things, because, hey, look, we're all business people, right? So I had a conversation with a prospective client, and it really doesn't come up a lot, what's your formal training? But we were having a conversation about it, and I said, my main experience is in business, because I've started 5 businesses now. And marketing is a huge fundamental piece of business. So while I might not have had this formal training in marketing, which by the way, today's landscape in marketing, I think is extremely different than traditional.
Oh yeah.
I think so much has changed, and digital marketing is in and of itself its own beast.
Even, I think about if we had gone to college for marketing, it would be so obsolete. I mean, this has been 20
I agree.
years. So I feel like it's, the experience is so valuable, and also interacting with other people and learning from other people who are actually doing it and have done it, not just have the theory of it actually too.
Yeah. And I think what has served me really well is really just, again, I just think that if you've been, how you built your business is really your marketing strategy, right? Like who you are in business. Because for me, I look back to the business that I had. We had a restaurant in the Outer Banks, and what I didn't even realize that I was doing was, at the core of our business, and the reason we were as successful as we were is because of our brand, because we built a brand. And now looking back on it in retrospect, I realized that that's what it was. People would come in all the time to the restaurant and they'd say, we just love it. It feels good in here, And what I didn't realize at that time was that was our brand, because it was, it was who we are. It was our values. It was how we treated people when they walked in the door. There all of those little things.
And that, I love that back then you may not have even realized that it was your brand. And that shows how authentic it was, because it was just who you all were and how you showed up. And I think that that's something that, it takes time to cultivate that. And a lot of times people, when they're trying to create their brand or marketing or, create more of a presence and visibility with their business, especially when it's art-based, craft-based, or some kind of creative thing where they're putting themselves out there and it feels like it is them, they might, I feel like people sometimes try to be something else, and they feel like they should be
that they think they need to be. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that this is a great example of like, okay, how can we really be who we are and let that be our brand? And you know, a lot of times it takes, like for me, sometimes it takes working with a professional, not so much now, but I think that in the beginning, years ago when I was creating businesses in California, like it took like somebody who knew more than me about marketing to give me permission to do that. And it's like, oh, because you have to kind of, it's like, you know, it's like the concept of culture. If you're a fish, you don't know that you're in water. And I think a lot of times our identity is that we can't see it because we're in it so much. And so it takes the outside perspective to actually really see what the brand is, what the values are, you know, all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel, and I think that as a marketing company, and I hope that that's what I do for people, is that I'm not telling them what they need to do.
Yeah.
I'm looking at them and who they are,
Mm-hmm.
and hoping to support them in enhancing that,
Yes.
enhancing your values, getting aligned with that, because that is the number one mistake. I mean, I've got so many people who I can tell when somebody comes in and they're like, well, I know I need to be on Facebook. And I'm like, okay, right there, that's,
I should.
that almost tells me that you don't need to be on, you don't need to be on
Right.
Facebook. I mean, when somebody says, I know I need this.
Mm-hmm.
No, actually you don't. I know businesses that are successful with, I mean, and I'm not advocating this necessarily, but I know businesses who are very successful without a website.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I mean, I know businesses who are successful with a really crappy website.
Right.
I know people who are successful, in so many different. It's more about who you are
Mm-hmm.
and what your story is and what you enjoy, and that's what you need to enhance. And I think that's probably the biggest pitfall that we all kind of,
Mm-hmm.
the trap that we fall into, is thinking that we need to do something because somebody
And
else tells us we do.
I love this, and this is brings us to another one of my questions, which is um, aspects or things that you see as the most important aspects of an effective marketing strategy. And it sounds like one of them you're putting in already is like really leveraging who the person is and what's aligned for the brand and what they're interested in doing versus what they should do, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Authenticity. And I hate to throw that out because I think authenticity has probably it's one of those catchphrases that's really been over, almost to the fact that like the word itself is like an it's like a
right. It's
antithesis of
overused.
what it means. It's
Right, but
overused.
it is true, and another word for that is also alignment,
Hmm.
values-based marketing. You know, like because the alignment thing is huge for me because I'm big on energy. Um, so I guess there's two questions I have kind of together here. So aspects of effective strategy that you think of beyond that one, and then how far ahead to plan out? Like I'm curious, like how far out you have people plan for their strategy.
So yep. So the first question, I like the idea of alignment. That's big, and I like I like that concept of saying just being in alignment with who you are. And I would say relationships. I don't know
Mm,
if that's necessarily quality, but and really that relationship to yourself, right?
mm-hmm,
Like what what you're doing it for, your why, what you enjoy doing. Um, and so I think all of that kind of, if you stay true to all of those, the alignment and the authenticity and your relationship to yourself, that you can avoid the traps of just following every shiny object, the SOS, shiny object
mm-hmm,
syndrome,
mm-hmm.
and the guru, what everybody tells you need to do, and don't
Right.
fall into that trap.
Mhm.
Um, and then the second question, I forgot already. What did you
The
say?
time frame, like how far ahead you suggest
Oh,
people
yeah.
plan?
Yeah, so that's another big one for me, right? Because you see, it's funny because I've got on my client intake, it says, uh, what's your 6-month plan and what's your 12-month plan, right? And
Mhm.
the 12-month plan, I'm put off by that a little bit. Maybe I'm not in alignment as I'm having this conversation with that question, because a lot happens
Yeah.
in a year. And what I think is important is I think it's important to have an overall vision
Mhm. Exactly.
And that's okay for a 12-month plan,
Mm-hmm.
but don't get too into the nitty-gritty and don't be attached, right?
Yeah.
So
Do you find that, so the long-term vision, like even say a year out, and then, so what I tell people is go a year out and then back up to the first quarter and see what you need to have happen in the first quarter toward that. And I suspect with the strategy, especially because the web is changing so much and the market's changing so much, like you probably have to change your strategy and tweak it based on what's effective.
yeah, absolutely. So you just have to, and one of the things that I think is really important about, when you're comparing small business to big corporations, because big corporations kind of do get stuck into these 12-month plans, right? Or
Right.
even longer,
Yeah.
probably 5-year, 10-year, who knows? And so I think one of the advantages that small business has on corporate is that we are fluid
Mm-hmm.
and that we're quickly able to pivot. And so don't get sucked into being into this rigid 5-year plan. And I think there's a big difference between your vision and your overall goals
Mm-hmm.
and then your objectives, right? So make
Yeah.
sure that you're keeping those things separate, because a goal and objective are different.
Mm-hmm.
A goal is I want to, I want to increase my revenue by 20% for the year,
Mm-hmm.
right? The objectives are going to be how you achieve that,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's, and you have metrics for those objectives. So be able to have that goal, but just know that the objectives are going to change.
Yeah, and I love how before we've talked too, you broke it down even further too, like to the next level of down of campaigns. Like, okay, it's like here's the bigger picture. What is this going to do? What is this on Facebook going to do? And or what is this on, whatever social media platform or email thing or whatever? Like, what is the purpose of this, and how does that get us toward the next thing? And I think that's something that people, that and the lack of tracking are two of the biggest things I think people, and I'm guilty of this too.
Totally.
I go in and out of that, and I try to, like, okay, I need to have accountability. And that's why I schedule sometimes with, marketing people or friends or whatever, just like figure out, okay, where am I? What's happening on my website? Let me look at this and get the bigger picture, and really look at what's happening and tracking it. So I know what to create from there. And I even had a client recently she was marketing in a different audience and, all this stuff. And I was like, okay, you got to track what you're doing so that you know what worked and what didn't work. So you know what to do next time. Because otherwise I think a lot of times people are not persistent enough, and and I do this too sometimes, but I think that people try something and then they stop and they're like, oh, it didn't work. But look, talk to us too about like the web in general and results and how long it takes sometimes to get results based on what's happening. You can give me specific examples if that works.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I agree with you. If you have not set the metric by which you will deem your goal successful,
Mm-hmm.
then how will you ever know, right? You can have a goal, but you have no idea how to judge it. So yeah, the metrics are huge. And I think expectations, so that definitely brings us to expectations. I think that we all really need to have a goal, and that's okay to have this lofty goal. Like, this is I call it, it just escaped me. That's it. My wildly important goal, your wig, right?
No,
And I
wildly improbable
totally
goal.
stole
I
that.
told you that. Wildly
Wildly,
improbable
yes.
goal. It's a Martha Beck thing. Yeah.
Oh, well, no, actually, I stole that
Really?
from the kids, because they have wigs in school, and they
Oh,
call them
that's so
wildly important goals.
fun. That's so cool.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. So that's funny. Yeah. No, the same thing. So
Yeah,
it all comes from the
exactly.
same concept. Um, and that's what I think of as like having a lofty goal and then having an acceptable goal,
Hmm.
and making sure that your expectations are in line, because I think it's important. I usually work with two kinds of people, and um, and the reality is somewhere in between those two people. So I'll work with people who either have these goals that the kind of traffic that they're going to bring in is just completely outrageous, and it's unrealistic. And then I have these other people who are more doomsday, and it's like very, very conservative, and so I think it's important. I think it's important to set the bar high, and then make sure that you have like an acceptable, what's going to be acceptable to you. Because what happens is if you set the goal high and then you don't reach it by a long shot, it can be very easy to want to quit.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I don't.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, you don't want to set yourself up. No, you don't want to set yourself up for failure.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that's really common in marketing, especially for people who don't know what they're doing. Because even people who know what they're doing are going to run a campaign and learn some stuff, and it may not be something that goes viral or some big huge success. It probably won't be. And so then it's like, how do you do the same thing again differently to make it better and keep tweaking it and keep being persistent? And I think a lot of times people try something and say, oh, it didn't work, or I tried that, or whatever. And it's like, yeah, but you got to try it for 6 months.
Yes.
And
yeah, you got to be in it for the long haul.
And that's the part where people
also,
I think need support, because I think lack of support makes that persistence less likely to happen.
Well, and also clarity, right? Because if you, and I see this, let me just use Facebook advertising, for example. Almost everybody that I go into if I'm doing it, it's a totally different story. But if I'm helping consult somebody on Facebook, or I'm going in and I'm seeing the stuff that they set up themselves, almost everybody just lumps everything together.
Yeah.
So if it doesn't work, you have no idea why it doesn't work. And if it does work, same thing. You have no idea why it does work, right? So the biggest thing I can tell people, and I think this is I think people understand it, but they don't do it, is to test, right? So if you're targeting an audience, let's just say I'm certain that I'm targeting women ages 35 to 50. So that's going to be across the board. But I want to break it down into interest-based segments. So let's say for your jewelry business, right? So we're targeting people. Let's target people who like different stones. Don't put them together, right? So you're targeting women of this age, of this income, and then the things that you split test. And this varies business to business, but are the interests. And then when something doesn't work, then you can just turn that off, and that people aren't interested. You're not getting a good reaction for people interested in citrine or whatever.
Right.
But and so I think that that's the most important part, because almost everybody that I know will lump all of these interest groups together and then have no idea which one works better than the other.
Right.
So testing is a big thing. And when you test things, only test one variable at a time.
That's
Don't
great.
then go do another, don't do another test and change the age and the interest group. And then you'll wonder which happened. Only change one thing at a time.
I think that's a challenge for me. And I think it's a challenge for people who are really creative, because they want to do different things and try new things all the time. Instead of just being persistent and changing things a little bit to tweak it and try and see what works. So I think that's patience. Patience. And that's also something that people can get help with, so that they can have support to do that and show up for that learning. And that kind of brings us back to what we're unlearning and what school teaches us, because school doesn't teach us to experiment and then tweaks things. It teaches us to get it right a lot of times,
right. Follow a method. Yeah,
exactly.
There isn't a method.
Right. But there is a method to testing and trying things out and tracking things. But it doesn't mean like there's one way to do it, because especially as everything is changing all the time completely, like even apps and just how to navigate them in general changes all the time. So that pliability of being able to be flexible and learn and try things and keep trying things and tweaking them is so priceless and underrated. I think it's not talked about enough. Now we're talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to be willing. I think marketing, I think it's tough, right? You have to be willing to you have to be somewhat risk tolerant
Yeah, absolutely.
in order to make a go of it and really make something work. And when you find it, that is the beauty of it, is when you find it, you can find your groove, and you just have to, like we discussed, it can't be a noodle throwing contest. It has to be, you have to be patient, and you have to be willing to take the risks, and you have to give it time, and uh, you have to be able to set your expectations.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big one in a lot of areas of business, I think, and how fast things happen, pacing, financial gain, like all of that. So, the name of your company is Upper Limits Digital. And so can you tell us why you chose that and what that means to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a book, which ironically I haven't even read, because I haven't. I feel like I've read very few books other than Dr. Seuss in the last decade or so. But there is I have read excerpts of this book, and there's a book by Gay Hendricks, The Big Leap.
Oh yeah.
And that's within that book, he discusses the concept of your upper limits. And your upper limits are basically those self-limiting beliefs that that kind of keep that glass ceiling over your head. And so for me, being in business and the way that I do business, that's been one of the major things that has stood in my way, are those upper limits. And so for me, it's about breaking through the upper limits, and that's when you can really kind of shine in your own business. And so that's sort of a core value that I carry with me. And so it definitely holds a lot of meaning. And and my logo reflects that. So if you see, my logo is kind of like the T and the E in upper and limits actually form a ladder. And so it's really about kind of climbing that ladder and breaking through your upper limits.
Great. And so you work with people who are beginning or who've already been in business for a while and want to go to the next level.
Right. So I think that, because most people don't ask what it means or know what it means, for that matter. But I think it still works.
Yeah,
I think people
absolutely.
At least are able to infer enough that it kind of goes, it goes, they get enough of it, and it works. But yeah, that's what it's about. It's about getting to the next level. It's about breaking through your own upper limits. And I do a lot of that. It's funny. I think I hear this from a lot of people in different industries. I mean, you are a coach and I'm not, but I can't tell you how many times, like, I'm working with clients and it feels like I'm coaching them through.
Oh yeah. Because their stuff is coming
shit.
up as they're asking these questions about their business and their brand and their identity and their values. That's all, that's all things that, those are all things that are relevant to, like, the depths that coaching would take people to. And it's going to bring stuff up. Absolutely. Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times, it's, while we do a brand message worksheet at the beginning of most of our projects. And what it's about is, it's about us learning the client's tone and their voice and their values and their mission. And so it walks kind of through all of those different pieces. And so we kind of collaborate on that with the client. Like, we'll create the first draft based on what we see and what we perceive. And then it evolves as we deliver it to the client and they give feedback. And so we end up with this brand worksheet. So, which is such a great start to any project, because then, and I would suggest that anybody who's working with any service provider that has to do with your business, whether it's like a VA or marketing support or somebody setting up your email, it's a really good exercise, because you might think somebody's on the same page as you, or you might explain to somebody all of those things, and they might say, yeah, I get it. And then you don't. Like, I can't tell you how many times there's been a disconnect between I'll come up with a logo for somebody and think, yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. I got you on the colors, I got you on the design, and then I'll deliver it. And it's like, no.
So
So
two different perspectives of what it was. And yeah, totally. I do that with
yeah,
jewelry sometimes
communication's
too.
key.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that brand message worksheet it's pretty clear. And
Mm-hmm.
so, it really sets the stage for a crystal clear understanding of each other. And so I what the heck did I start talking about that for? Ah,
I can't remember
yeah,
either.
it,
Yeah,
it
so
had to do. Go ahead.
the branding and the upper limits part and who your clients are. What else?
Yeah, and I don't know, and it'll come back to me, and it doesn't matter. But I do always start there so that I understand
The bigger picture.
um, the bigger picture. Yep,
Mm-hmm.
and so that we're able to speak to where, and that's just something that I would recommend that people do. It's a good exercise. I remember now because how many times people fill out that they'll go through that exercise with me, and they'll tell me, they'll go, gosh, I've been in business for 10 years. And that's the first time I really kind of thought about it in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, that step
You
back
know,
is really priceless for people. And it does, I think that's one place where people have been winging it for a long time sometimes, and they can do that and be successful. But then when they want to go to the next level, it takes that stepping back from working in your business and working on it in a new way and getting perspective. That's a bigger picture.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a valuable, I mean, even I still go through exercises like that from time to time. And
Mm-hmm.
I always come upon some little nugget
Yeah.
that some aha moment where
Yeah,
something
absolutely.
else is uncovered.
Mm-hmm. So two more questions. One is, do you have any other advice that you think about when you think about specifically creative businesses and business owners and marketing? Does anything come to mind for that audience specifically?
Sure. I've worked a lot with the industry. And I think one of the challenges that I come up against quite a bit is just, artists want to do art,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that the challenge, there is this huge, I find a lot of aversion to the technology piece,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
and so I think I've always heard a lot that it's really difficult, when somebody just wants to create their art, that it's really hard for them to actually implement the marketing
Mm-hmm.
piece of it. And so I think that, you mentioned earlier that support is a big thing, and I think that that's huge, to kind of build a support network around it. And also, again, to go back to, what fits you, and that's what you need to do. Like
Right.
I think that if it's forced, um, that it's going to be really difficult. Now, that's hard too, right? Because I don't want to say, well, you don't want to you don't do any marketing at all, and that's okay.
Right. It's like within here are the options. Here are all the possibilities. Here are the social media options. Here's the in-person options. Here's the paper options. Here are the networking options. It's like, which of those is the most appealing to you, and or where have you had the most success previously? And then start there. And how do you create a
Yes.
strategy from that place so that you can actually move forward instead of just throwing noodles, like you said before? Um, yeah. So that balance between stretching yourself and trying something versus like forcing something that's not natural for you. um like, for example, if somebody hates Facebook, like, don't go on Facebook, for example.
Right. Right. And I think it's also possible. I also think that there's this belief that, like, well, I don't have the money to pay somebody to do marketing. But, I think that it's also smart to think of it in a way that there are different levels of support that you can ask
Mhm.
for.
Mhm.
So, one thing that I've always told prospective clients or people coming and talking to me, it's like, you don't have to have the budget to pay somebody for completely hands-off management. Somebody else, you just hand it over to them. You could check in with somebody and schedule like a quarterly strategy meeting so that it keeps you kind of accountable and on task. So somebody could sit with you for a couple hours and design a strategy, and then you have your marching orders. Because I think that's probably the hardest thing, right? I mean, the hardest thing is I have a hard time doing that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. That's so helpful. Thank you. So tell us, if people want to get in touch with you or possibly work with you, what's the best way to do that?
So you can find me at upperlimitsdigital.com. That's the easiest thing, because that has every other way that you can get in touch with me. Facebook, Instagram. You can send me an email. You can actually schedule a meeting from my website. I do offer a 15-minute discovery call so that you can get on the phone and just see if it would be a good fit. And so the website is the easiest and most comprehensive way to get in touch.
Great. Thank you so much, Dawn. This was so helpful. Thanks so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
My pleasure.